Peace and blessings, everyone. I'm going to get started in a few minutes. Just looking up something real quick. So while you are waiting on me, take a look at this image right here. How do you spend your time? Discipline or laziness? So I want to talk about this concept of ego. Because I think once we understand what ego is, and we understand how ego truly gets in the way of our own success and truly gets in the way of our relationship building with other people, and definitely gets in the way of intimate relationships, it's our ego, right, that causes us to have breakdown in communication, have breakdown in relationship. And so I have a couple of scenarios, but I just wanted to talk about this title, this ego being defined by exit God out. There's a young person years ago that I ran into, and we were talking about, spirituality, religion, having a conversation. They weren't young as a child, but they were just young. Like, we were young in our adulthood. And the person was like, yeah, ego is exiting God out. And I said, wow. And I've never forgotten that. I mean, I probably heard that for the first time 20 years ago. And when I think about different scenarios where people are boasting about themselves or putting their name on the map or arguing with people or whatever it is, it truly is tied to this thing called ego, right? And what is it about this ego that has to feel like it needs to be heard and validated and appreciated and respected and, all these things, right? We learn, if anybody has studied psychology, we learn through Sigmund Freud and a lot of the other psychologists about this ego, right? There's super ego, and then there's ego, and then all these things, right? And I do think that ego plays a part in our survival at times, right? Sometimes our ego is what keeps us from losing our life. You know what I mean? Sometimes our ego and being so wrapped up into what we want and what we want to push sometimes can be an act of survival, right? But we also know that if you're truly exiting God out, right? And again, we have to agree that that's how we want to define that. That's how I'm defining it now. If we're truly exiting God out, then at some point you're going to get in the way of your own success, right? The Bible talks about lean on your own, or don't lean on your own understanding, right? There's something about your own ego, your own individuality, your own thoughts and processes that are not necessarily God's ideas and God's thoughts and God's processes. So it's important that we, as we navigate this thing called life, that we can separate, okay, this is my ego talking here. This is my, my flesh talking here. Okay, and then this is God talking, right? Now, it doesn't mean that every decision you're going to make is going to be in line with God. You would hope so, and that's the journey of perfection that we are all on, is that every decision that we make, every choice, every interaction is coming from the high self place, the God self. But we're also human, and we also fail at times. And so there's going to be moments where you are going to operate in your ego. And there's going to be times that you are going to operate out of your flesh. The question is, are you able to identify when you're operating from your ego, when you're operating from your God self, and when you're operating from your flesh, right? So if we agree that operating in our ego can be this concept of exiting God out, how do we quiet that voice within? And how do we make sure that we are keeping God at the center of what we do and we're not exiting God out, right? So I'm going to give you an example. There's often times where we are either in our work setting, we're either in a business conversation, we're either maybe even playing sports, whatever it is. And we've done all this work. We did I put out the report. I gave the report to the CEO. They got accolade, whatever. I was the best player on the court. I made that pass to get the layup so we could win the game. I help somebody build their house. You know, somebody asked me for a down payment and they were able to purchase a house through my efforts, right? So there's a lot of things in life that you know you contributed to and no one gave you credit. No one said, "I'd like to thank Imani Muhammad for all that she did to me." You know, nobody gives us the praise that we're looking for, right? And you know how much you put in. You know that if you hadn't have done this, this person wouldn't be getting the praise that they're getting, right? And so there's a natural desire that comes up in us. There's a natural instinct in human nature that comes up that the first thought is, you know what I did for that person? Or why not me? And that in that very moment is what I would call the ego, right? Now, it doesn't mean that you shouldn't get the accolades and the appreciations and the validations and the high fives. It doesn't mean that. But what it means is when you can sit and watch somebody else get praised for something and you feel like you deserve that same praise, right? And then you act out on that, right? Now you're mad at the person. Now you want to cuss them out, right? Now you want to give them the cold shoulder because somebody got something that you think you deserve, right? Then we begin to start taking things personal. And this is where I say it's the ego factor. So once the ego factor kicks in, then now I'm operating from an emotional state. And now I'm acting out. I'm saying things to you. I'm slick with my mouth. I'm making comments. I feel less than, right? And then typically what happens is you start talking about it. You start gossiping. And at the core of the gossip and at the core of what is being rooted in that is this ego. Your ego has gotten bruised. You feel like you deserve X, Y, and Z. In that moment, I want us to think about Jesus. And I think about many other prophets, right? But we're going to use Jesus, right? Jesus continued to tell the people at the time, I and my Father are one, right? So he had a father. So him and the Father can't be the same person. But he said we are one. And what that reference was, my thinking, my ways, my heart, how I move throughout this world is in divine accordance to the will of God. So his decisions, his actions were in direct correlation to God. So we look at him as the greatest example of how we should live our life, right? Jesus was an upright man like Abraham. Everything he did was about being upright and making sure his decisions and his choices were in line with the Creator, right? We're talking about Jesus. And so you learn very early through the scriptures, through Mark, Matthew, Luke, and John, that Jesus gave up himself, right? Gave up himself to do the work of the Lord. Well, what is the self? What did he give up? Right? I'm sure Jesus had some desires. Hell, he's a man just like he's a human. He might have had some desires, but he was willing to sacrifice his own personal desires to fulfill the desire and be in obedience to the Creator. So this is where I say ego is about exiting God out. Because if you're so tied to what you personally want in life, you personally want this to happen, you have these personal desires, if you're so tied to that, right, then you can't hear the Creator's voice, nor are you even listening to be guided by the Creator to be on the right path. So that's the key. I think, again, we're not going to always be perfect in our decision making. We're not going to always operate from the God factor. But I think it's important for us to understand this thing called ego and understand and check ourselves. When are we operating from ego and when are we operating from flesh? And when are we operating from the God factor? That's huge. So this diagram that you see right here, I wanted to show this because in that, right, in figuring out how you're operating, if you're operating from God, ego, or flesh, it's all rooted in how do you spend your time, right? How do you spend your time? Do you spend your time working and being disciplined and sacrificing, right? Or do you spend your time on the lower desires, operating from your ego, being lazy, not doing what you need to be doing, right? How do you define your time? And when you are in the business of being a servant of God, when you are in the business of serving God, then your time looks like this right here. You're a disciplined person, right? You check yourself often. You're in the business of reflection. You're always trying to reflect on who you are, what you did, decisions you made. You don't live a carefree and frivolous life. You're a disciplined person. Discipline means disciple. That's the root word, is disciple. All rooted back to the Creator. Exiting God out. Or not exiting God out. Bringing God in. Right? So I just wanted to share that little build. It came to me after a couple conversations today. I've been in front of my computer most of the day, having all types of conversations. And I feel like this is the theme of my conversations today. You know, and none of these, none of the conversations overtly are connected. But this is the theme that came to my mind after having different conversations today from totally different people. Person over here, in a workshop, all types of different people. And this is the common theme that just resonates with me. So I just jumped on here real quick, wanted to download what I feel like was uploaded in my brain to give to you all. And again, I think when we can surrender, when we can suppress the ego, I think we may see different decisions and choices in our life. And we may have better outcomes and better outcomes with our relationships, our personal relationships, our work relationships, our family dynamics, our children dynamics, right? Oftentimes our ego is bruised. And so now we got to make somebody pay for that. So we lash out, we react, we cuss out, we do all that stuff. But I think the bottom line is, when you can identify that what you're bothered about or what is irritating you is really wrapped up in you and your ego, then you start to begin to think about, when my ego is active, I'm not thinking about the Creator. When I'm actively in my individual mindset, I'm not thinking about God, right? You can define God how you want to define God, but you're exiting God out. Who wants to join me? Oh, is this Jerry? Oh, wow. Where have you been? Let's talk about it. My phone is about to die, but I feel like I haven't seen Jerry in 49 years. Uh-oh. What happened? I don't know what happened. It says she joined. Oh, man. You may have to request again if you truly are trying to join. I don't know what happened. Let me get my charger, y'all. Oh. Hold on. It's gonna work. 5. Yeah, I feel like it's been 1,000. Let's see if it works. Instagram is over here hating on me. Definitely hating on me. They won't even let me bring you in. That's so whack. Yeah, it's been a minute. Oh gosh, that's a whole nother. We should do a YouTube interview. Tap in with you, figure out what's going on, how you been. You were one of the few people, and this has nothing to do with the topic, y'all. But everything happens for a reason. You're one of the first. Okay. Oh, you're one of the first folks when I started doing this community organizing that I talked to and got plugged in with. And I have not turned back since. But you were one of the first. I often think of you. So thank you for tapping in. We have to connect. So here, I'm going to put in my email. We're actually holding our first fundraiser for my nonprofit. Oh, this is great. This is great. It's so funny because I'm actually in between meetings. I have to jump into this meeting at 2:00. So I did a presentation, and then I had about 30 minutes to spare, which is why I jumped on here to talk about this thing called ego that Lord knows we all have. And then I'm gonna jump back into this workshop. But it's great that you jumped on here. Send me an email so we can connect. At least just a Zoom call, if nothing else. I know a lot is going on. A lot is going on in your world. So let's talk for sure. Yes, yes. But that's the build, y'all. Ego. Figured out how we exit it out. I mean, how we exit out God, because that's what truly is happening when we operate from our ego. We just forget ourselves. I mean, I guess we remember ourselves. I was gonna say we forget ourselves. We remember ourselves, and we're so individualistic and tied to our ego. But at the same time, our job is to surrender that and fall in line with the Creator. So we would find our life much easier, much happier, much out of chaos, much in order, if we would understand and begin to separate between ego, flesh, and divine order. So that's the build, y'all. Peace and blessings.